Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I am Courtney Nelson, President of City Club. For 100 years, City Club of Portland is where civic-minded people come together to make Portland and Oregon a better place for everyone to live, work, and explore. We're gathered at the Sentinel Hotel, along with all of you listening on OPB or viewing on Portland Community Media or YouTube. The generous support of City Club's corporate and media partners enables us to put on the state's best civic programs week after week. Our media partner is Oregon Business Magazine, and our current Friday Forum sponsors are Avangrid Renewables, Airbnb, McKinley Irvin, AARP, and Uber. Please show our appreciation for our sponsors. And now on to our program today. Our topic is, Can Trust Be Rebuilt? An update on police reform. As we all know, policing in America is at a crossroads. Across the nation, communities are questioning the relationship between police and those that they serve, particularly its relationship with African Americans and people experiencing mental illness. The Albina Ministerial Alliance Coalition, the City of Portland, Multnomah County, the U.S. Department of Justice, and the police union are engaged in a collaborative effort to make the Portland Police Bureau a leader in 21st century policing. Today, we're joined by Portland Police Chief Michael Marshman, human and civil rights advocate Kathleen Saadat, and the Reverend Dr. Leroy Haynes Jr. of the Albina Ministerial Alliance. Chief Marshman joined the Portland Police Bureau in 1991 after 2 years with the San Diego Police Department. He served as the Police Bureau's liaison with the Department of Justice. He's a local PSU grad and attended the Senior Management Institute of Police from the Police Executive Research Forum. He's received various honors during his career, with the most recent being the Unit Commendation Medal in 2015. Kathleen Saadat joins us today with a rich history of diversity work in our state. Before her retirement in 2012, her career included service as ED for the Oregon State Commission on Black Affairs, Oregon State Director of Affirmative Action, and Manager of Diversity and Affirmative Action for the City of Portland. More recently, she chaired Portland's Community Oversight Advisory Board. Ms. Saadat has received Lifetime Achievement Awards from Portland PFLAG Black Chapter, Portland's Equity Foundation, and the World's Arts Foundation. Reverend Dr. Haynes received his Master of Theology from the Perkins School of Theology at Southern Methodist University, and his Doctor of Ministry from Bright Theological Seminary at Texas Christian University. He serves as the senior pastor of Allen Temple Christian Methodist Episcopal Church here in Portland, and as presiding elder of the Alaska, Oregon, and Washington District in the Alaska Pacific Region Annual Conference 9th Episcopal District. A civil rights activist in Texas, Dr. Haynes was a youth organizer for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, a field organizer for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and a co-organizer of the Texas Black Panther Party. His numerous awards include the NAACP Juanita Craft Award, the Martin Luther King Center Award for Civil Rights and Community Leadership. And today, our moderator is Joanne Hardesty, who has over 25 years of experience in the nonprofit sector on issues of racial, social, and economic justice. Ms. Hardesty served 3 terms in the Oregon House of Representatives and currently is the president of Consult Hardesty, a multi-purpose firm that provides board development services and trainings to advance just public policies. Ms. Hardesty serves on the board of Human Solutions and the Avel Gordley Center for Healing. Hardesty also serves as president of the NAACP Portland branch. We have quite the panel here for you today. Please welcome our moderator and panelists to the stage.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. As you can imagine, every question I will ask today, each panelist could take the whole 45 minutes to respond. And so we're going to be real sticklers about keeping answers to 2 to 3 minutes. And I want to appreciate the panelists taking time to be here with me today. I would like to start with Reverend Dr. Leroy Haynes and have him talk briefly about the timeline. How did we get here? Who and how did the DOJ get to town, so that our listening audience, both here and on the radio, really understand the framework under which we're operating?
Yes, to give a brief short historical context, the Albina Ministerial Alliance Coalition for Justice and Police Reform was initiated under the shooting and death of Kendra James, that 25 different community organizations gathered together. The following shootings by police officers of Aaron Campbell and the case of James Chassie were the major instruments that launched the attempt to get the Department of Justice to come here. Key to that was Commissioner Salzman and former Mayor Adams in that process. It was there that we called for not for a federal investigation, but for a federal audit. With the support of our congressional team, we were able to have DOJ come in and do an investigation, and that would eventually led to what we called an audit of policy and practices of the Portland Police Bureau. After their investigation, they filed a lawsuit against the Portland Police Bureau, and even though the initial step by the AMA was both racial and mental illness focus, their focus was that the Portland Police Bureau was guilty of excessive force and deadly force against the mentally ill and those perceived to have mental illness. And from that, we were in a mediation process with the Portland Police Union, the city, and the Portland Police Bureau, and the Albina Ministerial Alliance Coalition that led in 2013 to the present, what we call the settlement agreement that took place.
Thank you, sir. That was an excellent summary. And so I'm going to turn to Police Chief Mike Marshman and ask you my first question. And that question is, what is your biggest disappointment and accomplishment as it relates to the settlement agreement?
First off, thanks for everybody for coming here today. It's an extremely important topic. 2 to 3 minutes is going to be hard. So my biggest disappointment, well, actually, I'll switch that. My biggest hope, and I think that the reason we have promise is the City of Portland, Portland Police Bureau, I believe the community, I believe the Department of Justice, where they want this organization, my organization, your organization, the Police Bureau to be at the end of the day. I think there's quite a lot of agreement in where we want to end up as a law enforcement agency in your city. I think that's very, very good, because to have disagreement on where we want to be at the end of the day, I think is quite problematic. So with that said, my biggest disappointment is, if that is true, and I think that is true, the process, the implementation of achieving the mandates in the agreement are very arduous. If all the parties agree, by and large, how they want us to do policing in your city, but we can't achieve that because the process is holding us back, that personally frustrates me day to day.
I think we're going to get back to that process question in a few minutes. Kathleen, Saadat, Your last position was as chair of the Community Oversight Advisory Board. For our listeners, the city of Portland contracted with a Chicago firm to act as the community oversight community liaison, and that position has the role of chairing the Community Oversight Advisory Board. The very first person was former Oregon Supreme Court Justice Paul DeMunez. He was hired by the Chicago firm, and within a couple of months, he decided that he was unable to continue in that role. And then, Kathleen, you were hired, and recently you resigned. What's been the biggest challenge working with the Community Oversight Advisory Board?
Institutional barriers. First of all, what I mean by that is that we are working with several bureaucracies, all of which have their own set of policies, their own individual goals, indicators for achievement, none of which were designed to work with a community board, none of which were designed to be responsive in the way that a community board needs to respond. A community board needs to be able to pay attention to what the community is saying, relocate if necessary, which causes a problem with the purchasing part of the city government, to be able to take into consideration what the next step is, perhaps in the moment, rather than this kind of assumption that this will be a planful process that just goes in the way that we hope it will. There are lots of things that happen with human dynamics that are not accounted for in the creation of the board. Now, I want to be real clear. I believe that the concept is incredibly valuable and important. So I think it's important to keep the community voice in the dialogue. What I think is not okay is if the institutions that designed it, first of all, did not take into consideration the human dynamic, but who cannot find a way to be responsive to the needs of that community. And those are not personal barriers. They're institutional, bureaucratic barriers to the success of the community voice being heard.
Thank you. Dr. Reverend Leroy Haynes, you and I were on the committee that actually helped design the process for the COCL as well as the COAB. Would you give our audience what you believe our vision was and what we thought the purpose of the COAB would be?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say that the French writer Victor Hugo said that when an ideal time has come, no force on earth can stop it. The ideal time of police accountability is here for those who want to support it and those who want to oppose it, but it is a reality and it will not go away. The original vision of the COAB board was to create a new programmatic vision for the Department of Justice before previous an administrative monitor was established by the federal judge. And that particular individual had absolute control over the implementation process. We wanted to create something new and to make Portland a model, and that was to have community and citizen participation, and one designing the board and also in the oversight of the Portland Police Bureau. And so we began to, in terms of looking as having the COCO as the expertise part, but having citizens on the COAB part, the Community Oversight Advisory Board, and that they would in turn be a part of the oversight implementation of the settlement agreement. And so the vision was always what is great in Portland is community participation, citizen participation. And the concept overall was in terms of community policing, believing that the police cannot do their job of policing without community support. And community policing, it means that every area of the policing takes place from in terms of recruitment to training to policies to practices to oversight of the Portland Police Bureau. There will be citizen participation and engagement. And so the vision was to have a new model established that would crisscross across the nation. And of course, in the initial stage, there were a lot of challenges because there were some things that should have been done that were not done, like having an initial training for the board, having an administrative system for the board. There were basic fundamental things that were not done that allowed the board to get into a rhythm of weakness and chaos. And those things were trying to be reformed at the same time of doing the process of achieving the goal. And I think that that was one of the major areas where there was a falling down.
Thank you very much, Dr. Reverend Leroy Haynes. For our listening audience, I am Joanne Hardesty, and I am moderating a program with the speakers, Police Chief Michael Marshman, Kathleen Saadat, and Reverend Dr. Leroy Haynes. Chief Marshman, you're in a very unique situation because prior to becoming police chief, it was your job in the police bureau to ensure that the settlement agreement was being implemented. Now, as police chief, it's your job to make sure the settlement agreement is being implemented. How has your perspective changed from being the inspector to now being the police chief who's responsible for the reform?
Very good question. First off, I'd like to actually say that everything Dr. Haynes just said, I agree with. We are in, finally, I believe, a moment in time in policing where we're at that crux of community engagement and policing. I think it's taken a couple decades to get here, and I think we're here. So I think it's either the best time to be in policing or it's the worst time to be in policing, and people need to pick a lane, to be blunt. I personally think it's the best time to be in policing because at this crisis with the national narrative, I think that gives us some freedoms to do things differently. The Portland Agreement, it's not a consent decree, it's not a collaborative agreement. Dr. Haynes is correct. It's an experiment, to use DOJ's verbiage. If you read the agreement, again, I think in theory, it's perfect. It's just up to us to implement it. So my previous job was the oversight piece. To have an organization as large as the Police Bureau, to have an organizational culture change, I don't think you can do that by simply checking boxes on an agreement, right? I think it needs to be instilled in the fabric and body of the organization. My job more so now as chief than the previous job I had is how do I instill in my members not the mandate to change, but the internal drive to change and for them to understand why it's important to have this change in policing that we've been seeing coming, I think, for 20 plus years that I've been doing police work. I'm humble enough as your chief, and I don't think you hear, frankly, from police chiefs too often that I don't know it all. I just don't. I'm looking for the community to assist in that process with training, with policies, with accountability, everything. Because we should be a reflection of what the community wants. There is no easy answer, unfortunately, of how I implement this in the organization. But officers, whatever rank, and new recruits coming in have to see that this change is needed from their heart of hearts versus me mandating it. I think that's a big challenge. I do think in the core of it, the officers do feel the need for change and why that's necessary. I can't do it, though, through programmatic changes in my mind. I think it needs to be more cultural competency and training. Okay, that's easy to say. In brass tacks, how am I going to do that on every level of the organization? That's the challenge. I don't have the answer today, but that is what we need to do because, I'm probably over my time, sorry, because I've always said at the beginning of this, my number one client is not the Department of Justice. I'm not even sure if they're here today, but I've told them this before. Oh, they are. Hi, Jared. Oh, hi, Adrian. Of course they're here. Of course they're here. But I would not to be, I mean, in all honesty, this might sound strange, but I would love if at some point in time this community, the residents of Portland, told the Department of Justice, it's now time to leave. That's the goal I think we're trying to get to. And that's why I need to distill internally first before we go externally.
So Chief Marshman, I want to push back a little bit because I saw the survey of Portland police officers that asked the question of whether or not they thought the settlement agreement would do anything to improve Portland Police Bureau. And I think the percentage was 13% of Portland police officers thought that the Department of Justice settlement agreement would do anything useful to help reform Portland Police Bureau. So that's kind of counter to what you say the police officers believe change is coming and they're a part of it. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, so there's been a number of surveys by Portland State, by DHM, internally, and that's, most officers, I believe, feel they answered the survey that DOJ is either a punitive thing, takes away their ability to do work, might not make them as safe, all kinds of negative connotations with that. Simply put, I don't want to speak negatively of anybody in the past, I don't think the word internally was put out well. I truly think that if you get community engagement correct, the job as a police officer becomes easier, and I truly think the job of a police officer becomes safer. That's why I don't even like the term community policing, because I'm not policing the community, and that's something we do to you. I don't even like that term. I feel that a good chunk of the organization doesn't understand the agreement, because it's short, it's 77 pages, but it's complex. That's now on my shoulders to impart to the organization of members, what are we really trying to get at? A lot of it is an accountability of tracking what we do, good and bad, catching the errors, a fast iterative change on process and becoming better, and explain, but that's the process piece, but explaining why, why is that important to do policing differently in the city of Portland? If I can accomplish that, my assertion is the next survey or surveys we do in the future, you'll see that needle move, hopefully quite quickly and quite rapidly to the other side.
Thank you very much. For our OPB audience, I just want you to know I am speaking with Police Chief Michael Marshman, Kathleen Saadat, human and civil rights advocate, and Reverend Dr. Leroy Haynes from the AMA Coalition for Justice and Police Reform. Kathleen, I would like to ask you about, you as staff for the COCO, have had an opportunity to see the Chicago consulting firm and how they work and engage with community members here locally. There are community members who believe that there are community members that believe that it was inappropriate to hire a Chicago firm, and that has exacerbated the problem in communicating between the community and police reform. What do you say to that?
Why don't you put me on the spot, Joanne?
Because I love you.
I'll give you my honest opinion.
Yes, please.
Okay. My honest opinion was not a mistake to hire somebody from Chicago. I think that took them out from under certain kinds of things. So that's one part of that. That took them out from under a certain kind of local pressure. At the same time, it made it difficult for those people to engage with many of the community members here. I think that from the start, there was enough animus, hostility, negativity to make that even more difficult. Some of that had to do with the failure to educate both the board and the public about the purpose of the COAB. Some of that had to do with just the structures that were introduced. I would say the biggest structure was the chair position being under the COCO as it was, I think created some dissonance on the board. My recommendation has been that the board elect its own chair and that an executive director or administrative person be hired to carry out the work of the board. That all happened here, and that had so little to do with the people who were in Chicago who saw as their primary purpose interacting with the police bureau and other entities that had to do with the settlement agreement. I think they were doing that part of the job. The part of the job of community engagement was being left to the local COCO, is what we called ourselves, here in Portland to try to do the work of getting people to know more about what we were doing and why it was important. So I don't think it's a simple yes or no. I think any time you're working with human dynamics, the responses are complex. There's always a yes side and a no side. So there were some advantages to having somebody from Chicago. There were some disadvantages. There were some advantages to having the chair in that position for the first year, and there were some disadvantages. I'm recommending that for any continued effort, that structure be changed. I am not recommending that a lot of other structures be changed. I want to be real clear here. The difficulties with the COAB were not, we want to talk about fixing the COAB. I hear a lot of that. What we need to fix is the front end of this process. The front end of the process needs to be fixed. What we got is a reflection of the failure of the front end of the process to train, to inform, to educate, and to do a public awareness effort about what this is, what it means, and how important it is for people to be a part of their government and to speak up and say what they need.
On that note, Dr. Haynes, as you know, the COCO has asked for a divorce from the COAB. The COAB has asked for a divorce from the COCO, and the COAB has also asked that a court monitor be appointed. And so at some point, the Department of Justice, the City of Portland, AMA Coalition, and the Portland Police Association will need to come together and review the settlement agreement as it currently stands. Would you like to weigh in on what you think would be the most appropriate fix based on all the proposals that are floating around at the moment?
And there are quite a few floating around. First of all, with the COCO desire to have a separation, I think that's something that has to be strongly examined. They have a contract with the city to fulfill certain obligations, if they cannot fulfill those obligations, then we need to contract with someone else. COCO desired to just do with the data part and the reporting part to the Judge Michael Simon and not have any engagement completely with the COAB. We do, in the AMA Coalition, support that the COAB should select its own board chairperson, but also have administrative support and also have a facilitator to help with the community engagement part. But I believe that there has to be dialogue from all parties to take place in order to get the right fix and the right solution if we're going to keep the community a part of having a citizen participation in the oversight. Or the only other option is to go to an administrative monitor. There's strengths and weaknesses. Mussolini once said that I can get the train on time, running and stopping on time. The problem with that is that once you eliminate citizen participation, it will not come back. The citizens will not have the type of participation that they presently have on CoAB. And so there's no final solution. I think we have to examine the strengths and weaknesses and see what is best to effectively create a process that will bring about the model. And we have to keep the vision before us. The model is to create a model not only for Portland, but for the whole nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For our listening audience, I just want our OPB listeners to know I am Joanne Hardesty, and I am speaking with Portland Police Chief Michael Marshman, Kathleen Saadat, and Reverend Dr. Leroy Haynes. Chief Marshman, the auditor, mayor, and some members of the city council heard public testimony on changing how police misconduct is investigated. The biggest change would be to remove the process out of the public eye by combining the CRC, the Citizen Review Committee, and the Police Review Board. The mayor ultimately heard the public opposition and didn't call for a vote. What would be an ideal police review of misconduct? What would an ideal police review system of misconduct look like to you?
If I could take just 10 seconds to respond to Dr. Haynes. Again, I'm agreeing with what he's saying. For me, a court monitor, and I'll be real quick on this one, I would hazard to say that the community voice would be lost with that. And we need that in this community. The reason why I say that, because it goes right to your question of oversight. The public, I mean, I've looked at some other states where discipline's actually published on the internet. Very, very interesting to read that. The public needs to know how we do our processes, how I and the mayor hand out discipline, and for what reasons. When I think of this, though, what I always try to remember when it's kind of lost in conversation, I think a little bit, is the complainant, the person who's making the complaint. You really don't hear their voice or their concern much. I've got some cases coming to me now that are 2 years old. I don't see how that's fair for anybody, but especially the person making the complaint. Somehow I think we need to make a system that's quick, accurate, fair for everybody, but fast. I think anybody making a complaint against the police, the government in general, needs to have a quick resolution and somehow be transparent about that. Personally, I'm a big fan of the audit model, whether IPR does it, CRC does it, whomever does it. I would personally like every single case audited, because there's rich value in that for me as an organization to how to do it better. I think there's great transparency in that piece, but whatever system we do come up with, it's got to be faster. I don't know how I hold somebody accountable 2 years after the fact, and even if the resolution for the complainant 2 years later is the outcome they wanted, how can that be satisfying, fulfilling at all? It's 2 years later. I mean, when I call Comcast to get my phone fixed, I want it yesterday, right? I mean, that's probably a bad example, but it's serious when there's police accountability issues that serious. That has to happen quickly and have transparency built into it.
So, Chief, once again, I need to push back a little bit. The model is 180 days is what it should take to complete an investigation of a complaint. That's per the Department of Justice. And what we see here in Portland is that the holdup is in the paid professionals who are paid to do investigations, right? And so the CRC has 21 days. They're all volunteers. They come down to a city building, read the material. They invest a lot of volunteer hours. The holdup is with the people we pay money to do investigations. So why can't we speed them up?
Yeah, so again, if you get on the website, the system for accountability, I believe the word that the Department of Justice used to describe it's Byzantine. It's one of my new favorite words. It's a bifurcated system. Simply put, some of the reviews of the Department of Justice on the Police Bureau I don't agree with, but to give DOJ credit, the view of the accountability system I do agree with. Again, it's too slow, it's too complex. I have a hard time navigating it, and I'm the chief of police for you, right? I guess we can make it fast. Here's where it comes down to, I think, simply. If there's a complaint against an officer and it's just a minor work rule violation, let's say, not to get super technical, I think a sergeant could probably handle that in 30 days. But then how do you embed volunteers in the community? How do you embed that oversight piece into that without drawing it out? I think that's the big challenge. There's new PRB members and new CRC members I just met with this week. It's an incredible amount of volunteer service they're doing. They have to read thousands and thousands of pages of material that I read to come up with a conclusion. I'm very grateful for their work. There's got to be efficiencies. This is a smart town of smart people. There's got to be ways for those folks to be able to read those efficiently and quickly and be part of the process without frustrating them as well. So I don't have, sorry, I don't have the answer for you, but there's other cities do it. Maybe not as much public oversight. There's got to be a way we can do this. 180 days, that's 6 months. You know, that might meet the check a box, okay, we're in compliance, so we hit 180 days. I still don't think that's very satisfying.
Thank you very much for that. Kathleen, Saadat, you have any ideas of what an ideal community oversight system would look like?
Well, I haven't really made concrete my thoughts, but I agree with speed. And I think that a lot of that means that a lot of the established policies and processes need to be reinvestigated and revamped because they do not respond quickly to requests from the public. They also respond in a language that is sometimes not spoken by the public. That is what I call alphabet soup. We make everything into letters that we understand and expect other people to. I think an ideal system would, first of all, be visible to people. They would know how it works, the reasons that it works that way, and they would have reports on that accountability. What happened? What was the outcome? What was the rationale? And how was this measured against other things? We see right now, we're looking across the country, we see people being committed to jail for 15 years for this thing and not at all for this thing here, and they seem comparable. Well, let's have some standards, first of all, and let's have some standards that are understood and that have some input, again, from the community being served. What do you have to say about what you want that accountability system to look like? And let's put all that together in some kind of way and make it work. But I think the biggest obstacle is going to be running up against the institutions and the bureaucracies that are already established with their own goals and their own desires for outcomes that don't necessarily fit with the needs of the people in the community.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Joanne, can I say I agree that there's a lot of concern on my part about having any system that makes us lose our community voice. And so the first question is, does this recommendation for change allow for community input at its best degree, fullest and best degree?
Thank you very much. And for our listening audience as well as folks here, I want you to know that we also have the IPR, the Independent Police Review. Kathleen did say alphabet soup. The Independent Police Review is under the Auditor's Office at the City of Portland, and they are the body that is supposed to take complaints from community members of police misconduct. Their latest report says that they have tossed out 67% of the complaints that walked in their door over the last year. And so it is not a system that the public has a lot of confidence in. And so I want Dr. Reverend Leroy Haynes to respond to that question. What would an ideal oversight system look like?
Well, fundamentally, the Albina Ministerial Alliance has focused on creating a citizen review committee with subpoena power the ability to subpoena officers and excessive force case and deadly force case, and to be able to compel testimony. We believe that this ability will create a trust within the community of having citizens to review case. Now, ultimately, of course, decisions will be made by the chief of police, and also take the route also the regular criminal justice system from grand jury onward. But we have found that if you're going to really develop trust in the community, the issue of being able to hold officers accountable for the excessive force and deadly force is critically important. I agree with the chief that the cultural part in training, cultural competency and training is very important, and it's critically important in getting the right candidates and the right officers in the city. But we also have to deal with institutional bias and institutional racial bias. There's a systemic part. That's why policies and practices are critically important along with the culture. If you do not change policy and practices, take for example, AMA is very concerned about what happened with the Garudi case, a young Roosevelt student that was in term forced into a situation where he was brutalized by certain officers in that case, and the judge ruled that the police officers lied in the case, and we're still waiting on some kind of response from the chief and a response from the police on holding those officers accountable for the treatment of Garudi. And this sense, trust is a two-way street. It has to be trust. The officers have to have that trust to patrol the community that they are patrolling, and the citizens have to have trust that they're going to be treated fairly, they're going to be treated justice, and they're going to be treated without racial bias. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have just a couple of minutes before we'll be gone to the audience for questions. And so my next question should be a simple one. And the question is, the mayor-elect has stated he will do a national search for a police chief. Do you agree or disagree that that's an appropriate step for the mayor-elect to take? And I'll start with you, Chief Marshman. No personal stakes in this question.
Yeah. Why did I feel that was going to come to me first? So I'm more than happy to give this answer. The first day I had this position, I met with Mayor-elect Wheeler, and he asked me that same question. Actually, I beat him to the punch. I asked him to do a national search, and this is why. I've told other people this. I could have had a job someplace else before taking this job as police chief, but I felt like I wasn't done with the city of Portland yet. For the folks that like you, folks in the community, the folks that don't even work in the police bureau yet. And so I work for you, and I actually work for the folks that don't have a voice in the police bureau yet, hopefully new recruits coming in. I try to do day-to-day everything that's best for those two groups. If the mayor believes that the best thing to do is have a new national search for a chief, because that's what's best, great, do it. I actually suggested do it right now, but maybe it's a process piece. I'm totally comfortable with that. You know, I would probably put my name in the hat. It's really not about me. It's what's for the community. You know, that's what the mayor believes and the community believes. That's, simply put, that's the right thing to do.
Thank you very much. I agree with you. Kathleen, do you agree? Yes or no? I'm
Yes.
sorry, I'm just going to give you a yes or no because we're going to go to the City Club audience as soon
I
as.
agree, but I want to say one thing.
I'm going to have you hold that. Dr. Haynes, do you agree that's good or bad?
Yes, I believe competition is always critically important.
Thank you very much. For our listening audience members, as you know, asking questions is a privilege of City Club membership, and we have members lined up now to ask questions. Please identify yourself as a City Club member and ask your question, and please keep it brief, and please don't make statements. Welcome.
Virginia Cornyn, City Club member. This is a question for Chief Marshman. On cultural change, one of the biggest components is investment. What does your budget show in terms of investment in training of your officers and of the organization around culture change and eliminating or mitigating a lot of the anger and aggravation that's going on in the community?
So I don't have a line item budget for you of X number of dollars, but our training division through the Department of Justice agreement and other avenues is getting revamped quite a bit, because I think you need to write policy that we talked about before, write policy that works for the community and immediately train to it and then assess it to see if it's working. So we're doing that, and I'll put a lot of money there. It's a big budget for training, hiring outside consultants to do equity training and implicit bias training. We have that coming next year, but a specific line item number, I don't have a dollar figure for you if that's what you were asking.
Good afternoon, Sharon Maxwell, City Club member and past COAB member. My question is twofold. It's for Chief Marshman and for Dr. Haynes. Dr. T. Allen Bethel reported to the Portland Tribune that you eliminated the Division of Community Engagement, which was led by an African-American Assistant Chief Kevin Modica. Could you tell the community why? And then the second part of that is, were you aware that Rosenbaum, the current contractor, was not a finalist for the 5-year, $5 million contract? Dr. Haynes, for you, as AMA leader, why didn't you fight for diversity in the candidate pool for the contract, for the compliance? And why have you not supported the recommendations of the COAB? Thank you.
Okay, I'll try to answer those in order. I used to have 4 assistant chiefs, or were 4 assistant chiefs in the police bureau. That 4th branch was made under former Chief Larry O'Day and was labeled Community Services Branch. I believe a better name for that branch would have been Operations Support, because the items in there like traffic and youth services really support the day-to-day operations. I removed that whole branch, actually didn't really remove it, reorganized it under the former existing 3 branches for a number of reasons. One's staffing issues, which we can get into a little more if you want. But ultimately what I didn't want to have happen is community engagement to be siloed to a branch. That needs to be embedded throughout the whole organization as a whole. There are some concerns with that, which I understand. If you have everybody do that, it kind of thins the soup. I mean, I get that that's the other side of that coin, but everybody needs to do that to make this work. In terms of removing Assistant Chief Kevin Modica from that, I put in a whole different leadership team. I'm thinking now, because I don't want to overstep my bounds with some of my lawyers here. There's still current investigations going on. I can't get into that. That's one of a number of reasons why I did do that. I'll add one more thing, and I can't remember the third question. I'll just go to the third question, which was the COCL piece. I was aware of that process because I sat through all the interviews for all the teams, candidates that became COCL candidates. Not my decision, but I was in the audience because that's the job I had to see how this experiment, the COCL position, was going to be fulfilled.
Dr. Haynes, did you want to respond to any part of her question?
Of course, my friend Chief know that I take a different position than him on that. I believe that the African American community in Portland is in that need of leadership on the command staff that knows the issue of the culture, the flow of the community, the networking process of the community. We are forced to dealing with, we are battling on two fronts, gang violence, and then in terms of police accountability and other economic issues. And this is a time that we need an African-American person in the command staff. And just on that, man. The other thing is in terms of the question of diversity. I've been fighting for diversity all my life. I have over 40 years since the age of 13 on demonstrations, going to jail with Martin Luther King and others. But when you're one voice among many voices, and everyone has a right to vote, whatever they want to vote, you fight and you continue to fight even once the decision made. Secondly, with the COAP thing, there were some agreements that the AMA support with the COAP. We do not support the COAP resolution to create an extra judge for an administrative monitor. We do support that the judge, that the COAP itself select its own chairperson, and that there's administrative staff that would take place. We are still struggling with the issue of the COAP and the COCO in the separation process, but we do support in terms that the COAP needs to have its own chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I have a question from the audience. I am concerned about some unfortunate, and this is for the chief. I am concerned about some unfortunate police interactions with African-American people I know within the last several years, specifically men being profiled as suspicious just because they are in a public place, Lloyd Mall, street parking, close in Northwest Portland. No violence, but the assumption made that these men need watching. What kind of training is being done to work on implicit bias?
So the implicit bias training we have coming up is actually next year. The training we're doing now for this fall in-service is an awareness training of the history of race relations in the city of Portland, mainly the African American community, on redlining, on Vanport, some of the incidents that Dr. Haynes talked about. Our officers, my officers, your officers need to understand that the reason why I didn't wear a suit today is because this uniform evokes some past history. I have some officers that work for me now that weren't even born when Rodney King happened, right? So there's a lot of education they need to know that when they wear this uniform into an environment, some baggage is coming with that. There's some concerns, there's some hurt, some valid hurt from the community, specifically the African American community. So officers might even be acting in a way that they don't know that they're inflaming some of those past injustices. If my officers don't understand that, you're never going to bridge that gap. And for whatever reason why you're encountering one another, it's probably going to go bad. There's all kinds of technical stuff, stereotypic threat on both sides that research shows. But the training is awareness. And once you have that awareness, next step, in my belief, next step would be implicit bias training. Everybody here has implicit bias. You need to know what you yourself are bringing to the table. For me personally, that was the big aha light bulb moment, so I had implicit bias training, and continually build upon that, and hopefully have that be a barrier breakdown to have questions. I mean, I've been to Dr. Haynes' office now a couple times to have those discussions, and many with Kathleen. So that training is the, I think, simply put, the ability to have officers understand the community's concerns and past issues, what officers need to understand about themselves personally, and the ability to communicate that in a dialogue. The problem is you probably can't have that during police encounters, right? You need to have that on the front end, so when you do have encounters with the community, you can start hopefully one step ahead of where we're at today. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
I'm Edward Hershey. I'm a City Club member. I'm just cycling off the Independent Police Review Board after 6 years and remain a member of the steering committee of the Training Advisory Council, which advises you, Chief Marshman, on training issues. I'd like to delve a little more deeply about the implications of the national search question. Over and over again, most recently today in the op-ed page of the New York Times in a piece by William Bratton, insularity has been identified as a major impediment to the kind of change you've described, Chief, and aspire to, Chief Marshman. With one exception, every police chief in the memory in Portland has come up through the ranks and either spent no time or, like you, very little time anywhere but in the Portland Police Bureau. Do you think that this adds to the insularity? And do you think we would benefit from having some outside leadership?
Well, I could probably answer that both ways. So I've been doing police work now for 27 years. I've witnessed it myself. I've lived it. You know, I've told other community groups that when I started out in policing, I drove into the San Diego Police Academy, I had a peace sticker and a question authority bumper sticker on my car. That didn't go well for me, right? Because of the culture. San Diego Police Department kind of beat it out of me. But it's still there. So there's many cultures within our bureau, and again, we need to be aware of that, and to not make it an us versus them. So whether you bring a chief in up through the ranks, there's pros and cons of that. I mean, I know Portland. Hopefully, I'm more connected to the community than outside chiefs. You can bring an outside chief in. You might get change. It might just be a little bit slower because they're not used to the Portland way. I think we've seen that with some of the conversation we've had today of bringing outside folks in. There's pros and cons to both. You could have new innovative ideas maybe from the outside, or you could have a chief that comes in from some other community that has a different governmental structure than we do, and then you hit walls that way. So I think it's probably more person dependent versus insular versus from outside.
I think this will be our last question from the floor because we're just about out of time.
Kurt Wabring, member. I'm referring to the piece in the New York Times today by the Chief of Police in New York, Bratton, who's retiring today. He has a number of good recommendations, one of which was around, again, training. And he said that with veteran officers, they require 3 days of training in de-escalation of violence between police and people that they're dealing with. 3 days of training to de-escalate and to treat people with respect. I'm wondering if you have anything going like that now, or if you don't, would you put something like that in?
So I assume that one's for me. Yes, we do have de-escalation training. We had, with the help of the Department of Justice and Community, our new mental health directives has de-escalation policies in there, steps to do that. When you leave a scene, I'm gonna go kind of fast for time. When you leave the scene, make a plan. And then for the accountability piece, when we do have incidents where right after actions, sergeants, lieutenants, captains, commanders, eventually up to me, we have to make sure that de-escalation was used in instances where that's appropriate. So not only do we have the training, which recurs every year, but there's accountability piece on the street for how we do our work, that's being followed.
And I will just end that by saying that the COCO also has been auditing how that de-escalation training is taking place, and there seems to be a disagreement in between about really what de-escalation means, and so I hope we will continue to work on that, and I thank you all so much for being part of the panel. Please give them a big hand of applause for being here today.
Yes, thanks to all four of you for being here today and having such a thoughtful dialogue on this really important issue within our community and across our nation. I'm Courtney Nelson, President of City Club. I want to thank Walter Robinson II and Bryce Bennett of our Friday Forum Committee for producing today's program. I hope to see you again next week. We're adjourned.